All right, Shabbos, good morning, a good tevach. An incredible schos Baruch Hashem to begin the week today, the last complete week of this year, the last complete week of Tafshin Pei Dalid in Eretz Hashem, and we're zochet to start it with Bava Basra. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Elul, Baruch Meir and Rena Dubin, in honor of their children and all of the Suburban sons and daughters beginning their year of study in Eretz Yisroel. May their Torah study and mitzvos in the Holy Land merit the release of our precious hostages, the success of our soldiers, the return to their families, in the arrival of Moshiach, tzidkeuni, bimheira, amen. And our daf pastries for today, sponsored by Saeed Sima Haken, in memory of Saeed's father, Moshe Ben Bashi Hakohen, Zichron Lebracha, whose yarhzeit is today. So the Hakens are sponsoring the shir, daf Yomi sponsorship, and the pastry sponsorship. Merit Hashem up down the merit. No pastries? No pastries? Okay. Oh, they're in the kitchen. They're in the kitchen. Good. All right, they're there. Oh, but you can't go now. Now, if you leave, you are mamish giving up olam haba for olam hazeh. No, I'm just kidding. You can go. I'll stretch out the dedications. Go ahead. I'll do a little chazara. We thank the Hakens very much for their sponsorship of the shir and the pastries, which are they're in the kitchen. In the kitchen? Okay, in the kitchen. Please go ahead and enjoy Meretz Hashem. The shir as well as the brachas that we make should provide an aliyah for the neshama in Meretz Hashem. We'll say with that is like every week. Every week we begin just with just a simple bracha, a simple hope, a simple goal, a simple aspiration that in Meretz Hashem, this should finally be the week that our precious hostages come home. This should finally be the week that in Meretz Hashem, our soldiers should encounter complete and resounding success. B'chol ma'aseh yadayim. And halavai, maybe it's not beyond the realm of possibility that we could end out this year with the bracha of shalom, with the bracha of resounding victory, with the bracha of besaros tovos for Klal Yisrael, and Emir Hashem. But at the same time, whatever HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings our way, we are ready to accept it, we're ready to makabel it, we're ready to go ahead and shoulder it. But Emir Hashem, we should just be zocha to have a week of strength, a week of besaros tovos, a week of bracha, a week of shalom for all of Klal Yisrael. So with that, let us begin. So today's daf is Peites 89. We are picking up Emir Hashem on Peiches Amud Beis 88b, and we left off. Shkrach to Mordechai Silber who gave a great shir yesterday. We are picking up with Rabbi Levi, which is 3, 6, 8, 9 lines up from the bottom. Rabbi Levi, Kasha Gezel Hayot, Yosem Gezel Gavah. So really interesting Gemaras to kind of get us started for today. So Rabbi Levi literally says, Gezel Hayot means what we'll call regular theft. Now, what does it mean, regular theft? Regular theft means one person steals from another person. So one Gezel Hayot, stealing from another individual, is Kasha. Kasha was him. Now, it's interesting the lashon of Kasha. How would you translate kasha? What does kasha mean? Right? More difficult or harder. So remember, that can mean a couple of different things. That can mean from a liability perspective, that the liability that one encounters when stealing from a regular individual is greater than the liability from stealing from hekdesh. Kasha could also mean in terms of a concept of tshuva. It is more difficult to do tshuva for gezel hayot more than it is for gezel gavah. But let's go with the simple idea that kasha means that the iniquity, the culpability associated with stealing from another individual is even greater than the culpability associated with stealing from hekdesh. So Gemara says, how do you know this? Shezeh hektim chet lemeila, v'zeh hektim meila lechet. So we'll say it's interesting, both of the psukim of theft from an individual and theft from hekdesh, both imply the two lashonos of chet, which means sin, and meila, which means trespass. Interestingly enough, in the pasuk, when it deals with theft from an individual, the word chet comes before me'ilah, and yet when it comes to hekdesh, me'ilah comes before chet. The Gemara looks at the fact that whichever one has chet first, that means it's more severe. So the fact that chet appears before me'ilah in the case of regular theft, but yet chet only appears after me'ilah by gezel hadyot, indicates to us that ultimately theft from an individual is even greater than theft from hekdesh. Take a look. That's a friend, by the way. That's a friend. That's a chavrusa omitusa. So the Gemara says as follows. So the Rashbam goes ahead. The Rashbam highlights over here exactly the psukim, but I will say, a very profound Gemara, because we would think just the opposite, right? That gezel from hekdesh would be greater than gezel from hadyot, and yet halacha l'maaseh the Gemara tells us the opposite. I will say now there are two dramatic lessons to be learned. First of all, just take a look. Well, you can look at the psukim on your own, but just understand the tremendous hashkaf on this. What does this mean? That stealing from the individual is worse than stealing from hektish? So I'll say two things. So first of all, from a tshuva perspective, it is a person is going to have a much easier time doing tshuva for stealing from hektish than from stealing from an individual. Why? The good part about doing tshuva, right? If you steal from hektish, what do you do? Give it back. Pay back the money. Who do you pay it back to? Whatever it is. You go to beishamikdashlishi.org, right? And you go ahead, right? You pay online, you go ahead. Fine, I returned it. There doesn't have to be a face-to-face encounter. You steal from someone, what do you have to do? You have to go back. Now the truth is, this, remember again, we had this in Bava Mitzia, or Baba Kama, about, maybe Baba Kama, right? When you go ahead and you return something, does the Heishav Esagzela have to be like face to face? Or can I just literally drop it at the person's doorstep and run away? So there's a whole discussion over there about that. But doing tshuva from interpersonal theft is incredibly difficult because it forces me to encounter someone else that I wronged. So it could very well be that on a tshuva level, it is much more common for a person to do tshuva for theft from hektish than it is for theft from another person. Because with theft from hektish, I stole from an entity. I didn't wrong a person, I wronged an entity. Okay, I can make up for that. There could be a certain level of anonymity in the tshuva process. You say, that's why we know this, right? It is so much easier to do tshuva for averos bein adam l'makom than bein adam l'chavero. Because how do you do tshuva from averos from bein adam l'makom? What do? Asham d'bagamnu is a conversation. And the easy part, and the strange anomaly is, as much as the Kodesh Baruch Hu was everywhere, I feel like I don't have to do it like face to face with him. Or even if I do it face to face, there's a certain level of removal. Masha'in Kain, to do a tshuva for a chid bin adam l'chavero is incredibly difficult. To have to go back to a person who I wronged and say I'm sorry, to have to confront them is incredibly difficult. So it's from a tshuva perspective, ultimately again, it could very well be that doing tshuva for interpersonal theft is harder than tshuva for theft from the Beis HaMikdash. It could also the opposite could also be true. That sometimes a person could also feel more compelled to do tshuva for theft from the Beis HaMikdash than for a person. Right? In other words, it's sometimes we rationalize our interpersonal interactions. There's really no way to rationalize theft from the Beis HaMikdash. It's just mi'ilah. But from another person, they cheated me this time, they owe me this, they never gave me this. So it could also be kasha can mean a couple of different things. Either that again, it is more difficult to do tshuva when you steal from another person because that requires confrontation as opposed to tshuva from hektish, which could be done with a level of anonymity. Or maybe it's more difficult to do tshuva for gezel hedyot because I rationalize it. Masha'in Kain, gezel from the Beis HaMikdash, there's no way to rationalize it, so therefore I'll come to do tshuva. Okay, V'amar Levi, Bo Rebo says in Rebbe Gemara, Bo Reish Lo K'minis Kodesh Baruch Hu Midas Basar Adam. See how HaKadosh Baruch Hu is so different than man. Literally, again, the midos. The midos don't mean per se the character traits. It means the model of interaction. See how the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu interacts with us is so different than we interact with each other. How so? HaKadosh Baruch Hu beirach Yisrael be'esrim ushtayim v'kila mishmorna. Excuse me. Thank you. So let's listen to this. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu blessed us, He blessed us with 22 letters. Now, we'll see exactly what that means in just a moment. That's the alphabet. Right? That's the alphabet. He blessed us with 22 letters. V'kilalan b'shmona. And He only cursed us with 8 letters. What does this mean? Beracham be'esrim ushtayim. What does it mean that He blessed us with 22 letters? So listen to this. May ibichukosai ad komemios. So we'll say, so the brachos. The brachos in Chumash in Parshas Bichukosai. Right? So interestingly enough, so it begins from the aleph of im bichukosai, and the end of the brachos is the saf of komemios. That's the section of brachos. So when HaKadosh Baruch Hu benched us, He benched us with all 22 letters of the aleph base. When He cursed us, v'kilalan b'shmona, from v'im bichukosai, right? This v'im bichukosai tim asu, if you repulse my ways, so it's the vav of v'im bichukosai. Ad v'eshukosai ga'ala nafsham. So it goes from vav to mem, which is 8 letters. Vav to mem, which is 8 letters. So bracha is 22 letters, klala is only 8 letters. V'ila Moshe Rabbeinu, but when Moshe Rabbeinu barachan b'shmona v'kilam esrim shnayim. When Moshe Rabbeinu blessed us, he blessed us with 8 letters, and he cursed us with 22 letters. Hausal berachan b'shmona, he blessed us with 8 letters. Top of Pei Tes and Aleph, Mei v'haya im shamoa ad v'ad la'avdam. So we'll say v'haya vav until la'avdam mem. The kilan be'esrim shtayim, but he went out and he cursed us with 22 letters. May v'haya im lo sishma, and it will be the vav. If you don't listen, ad ve'in kone ad hey. So I'll say. So remember again. So essentially, that's a full cycle of the aleph base from vav until hey. So I'll say, what does this mean? What does this mean? So first of all, again, Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't love us. He cursed us. He cursed us with 22 letters. Loves us with 8 letters. Of course, Moshe Rabbeinu loves us. What Chazal are trying to convey to us is something that often we overlook. We've spoken about this a number of times over the last few weeks, which is, bless you, the tremendous love that the Ribono Shel Olam has for us. The tremendous love that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has for us. And sometimes, we make the mistake, and it's funny, I mentioned this in the women's shir. I remember almost nothing of what I learned in high school. Almost nothing. I always feel bad saying this because my parents paid a lot of money in tuition. But I remember literally almost, I don't know what I was doing. I'm really not sure where I was because I was present. It wasn't like truant or anything like that. But I don't know. I just one thing I remember. Of course I remember Shir and Torah. I want to be a good Jew. I remember everything. About that. And I say, but Lamaisa, it's so fascinating. One of the things I remember is I had like a literature class. I think it was 10th, 11th. I don't remember what it was. And there was this section that we were doing for some reason, like on sermonic material, but like the transcendentalists. I don't remember the whole zach with it. Any event, there was this sermon that we did, and I don't remember why we did it, but maybe the teacher was giving mussar to the class. I don't know. It was called "Sinners in the Hand of an Angry God." That was, you could Google it. I don't know. It's a famous sermon given by some famous preacher. So I'll say you could pretty much tell from the title what it's about, right? This is like this man gave this like on a Sunday morning, right? And again, like I'll say, it is literally Kishmo Kenhu. It is about how you're gonna burn. It is about how you're gonna burn, and it is about how when you sin, God is filled with nostril flaring wrath, and He is going to destroy you and consume you repeatedly. And I remember looking at this and like, can you imagine what Kiddush was like that day after services? Like, hey, I'm like imagining people filing out like, oh man, and I remember even as a kid, not very theologically or spiritually sophisticated, thinking like, I am so happy that is not us. So happy that is not our hashkafa of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So happy that is not. Do we have a Ribono Shel Olam who punishes? We do. But we have Ribono Shel Olam who punishes with love. And that's when the Chazal are trying to make. Remember, the Gemara says, Kala Omer HaKadosh Baruch Hu Vatran. Whoever says HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mevater and never punishes for anything, Yivat Shemel, literally, his inside should spill out. In other words, that's foolish. To say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't punish and that there's no accountability in the eyes of God, that is false. There is accountability for everything. And yes, there's a concept of onesh. But understand who punishes and understand who HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. The Ribono Shel Olam is the God who punishes with 8 letters and gives brachos with 22 letters. At the end, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's love far eclipses man's love. In other words, when you were to think about someone who loves us, who is the greatest personification of a person who embodied love for Am Yisrael, you would say Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was Moser Nefesh for us more than anyone. Moshe Rabbeinu said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, either save the klal or erase me. There is no one in the history of our people who ever had a love for Klal Yisrael like Moshe Rabbeinu. Yet even Moshe Rabbeinu blesses with 8 letters, curses with 22 letters. So as much love as Moshe Rabbeinu has, the Ribono Shel Olam's love eclipses that tenfold. That's who we dive into. That's who we connect to. And yes, even when we're punished, that's who we're punished by. A Ribono Shel Olam who loves us more than anything. Incredible. Let's go weiter. Says the Gemara, Makom Shnagu Lamad Bagasa. So we'll say, so the Gemara now goes through a series of fascinating braysos. So skip the parentheses. Those are just mnemonics for how to remember everything we're going to do. and we're not going to remember it anyway. So let's go back to it. So let's save a little bit of time. So minayin, we'll say first wide line. Minayin she'ein mochkin. We'll say, okay, fine, let's go ahead. Minayin she'ein mochkin b'makom shegotchin v'ngotcha makom shemochkin. So we'll say, so remember again, one of the things that we've come to see in this whole sugya is how much of everything that happens, like in the marketplace, in the marketplace, is minhag hamakom. It's minhag hamakom, right? People sold goods in different kinds of ways, and whatever the minhag hamakom is, that's what you need to stick with. So the Gemara says something very interesting. How do you know? Shein mochkin b'makom shegotchin. So what does mochkin mean? Mochkin means smooth out, right? So let's say again, I'm going ahead and I'm buying, I'm buying flour. I'm buying flour. So again, there were places that would go ahead and heap the pile, and there are places that would smooth out the pile. Now the Mishnah made it sound like you always heap the pile, but again, there are different practices. So the Gemara says, how do you know? You can't smooth the pile in a place where they normally heap the pile. And you can't heap the pile in a place where they smooth the pile. In other words, we'll say, this is fascinating, that when it comes to commerce, you have to follow minhag hamakom. How do you know? Talmud Lomar, Eifa Shlema. The pasuk says a complete measure. So complete measure doesn't just mean how you weigh stuff out, but complete measure also represents this idea that whatever the normative market practices are, you have to follow that. Amar, we'll say second white line. Amar Harini Mochek b'makom shegotchin ulefachos lo min adamim. How do you know? We'll say even if a person says like this, you know what? Even though I live in a place where normally they heap the pile, I'm going to smooth it, and I'll give the purchaser some money off. In other words, I'm not cheating anyone. For whatever the reason, I want to smooth it. But I'll give the purchaser a couple of dollars off. Or I'm going to pile it in a place where normally they go out and they smooth it, and I'm going to charge them a little more. How do we know still? So we'll say, so in other words, in this case, the seller's saying, whatever it is, whether I'm smoothing or piling, I'll add on a few dollars or a few shekel and take off a few shekel. Tamalomar, Eifa Shlema V'Tzedek Yeloch. Pasuk says again a complete measure. So again, the idea is follow marketplace practices. Tanabanan. Minayin she'ein ma'aynin b'makom shemachriyin ve'ein machriyin b'makom shema'aynin. So we'll say this is very interesting. How do you know? Now we'll say ma'aynin means a place where they keep the scales level, versus machriyin, where they weigh the scales down. Now, what does this mean? So going back to the Mishnah, remember again, the Mishnah indicated that when you're selling, when you're measuring produce on a scale, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to weigh down on the seller's side a tefach. Now, what the Mishnah kind of said is like a davar pashut, the Bryce is telling us some places didn't and some places didn't do it. So ma'ayin is actually very interesting. The lashon of ma'ayin, Rashi says lishko ayin ba'ayin. Means a place where when they measured something, they measured it equally. The scales were eye to eye, right? They were equal. So versus machriyan means a place where they would weigh down the purchaser's side of the scale a little bit. So how do you know? Minayin shein ma'ayin b'makom shemachriyan. That will say again, you don't even out the scales in a place where they tilted. And you don't go ahead and tilt in the place where they keep it even. Once again, same idea, right? That halacha l'maisa follow marketplace practice. Tamalomar Evan Shlema, right? A complete weight. Uminayim Shim Amar Harini Ma'ayin b'makom shemachrin olefachos lo min adamim. How do you know that in a place, let's say, where they tilt the scales? I see, you know what? I'm going to keep the scales even, but I'll take off a little bit of the purchase price, or Varini Machriya b'makom shema'aynin, or I'm going to weigh down the scale in a place where normally they have it even. Ulahosif l'adam, and I'll add on a little bit of shekel, a couple of shekel to the purchase price. Shin shomalo. You don't do that. Whatever the practice is, that's what you stick with. Talmud Lomar, Evan Shlema B'Tzedek. So therefore the pasuk says a complete and just weight. Once again, follow marketplace practices. I will say, this is an interesting idea. There is a tremendous Musar Haskell on this as well, which is the need to be respectful to minhag hamakom. And I will say, now sometimes we find ourselves like in places that may or may not, reflect our personal views. It is always important to be deferential to whatever the minhag hamakom is. You see this in halacha all of the time, right? A person from Eretz Yisroel comes to Chutz La'aretz, and they're here for Yantiv. So again, what's the halacha? The halacha is a ben Eretz Yisrael who's in Chutz La'aretz doesn't have to keep 2 days of Yantiv. He keeps 1 day of Yantiv, but he has to be careful about that second day. See, he can't go driving around town on day number 2. He can't even do Omalacha on day number 2. There's a protocol. There's a way to go ahead and conduct one's self when one finds themselves in a different matzav, a different life situation. Again, it's always an important idea, just to be deferential and to be respectful to whatever the reality we find ourselves in. So you live in a place where there's a marketplace standard, follow the marketplace standards. That's it. I'm Rabbi Yehuda Misura. So we'll say this is beautiful. So we'll say, so just to quote you the pasuk in its entirety. The pasuk says, don't have in your home, literally again, different weights. Literally, eifa ve'eifa, a weight and a weight, big and small. In other words, what Torah is telling me is, halacha l'maisa, don't have 2 sets of weights. One set which are correct, and one set which are a little bit off that you're going to use to cheat people. So what's driving the Gemara over here is, why does it have to say beveischa? Like, why does it have to say don't have in your home? All it needs to say is what? Don't have. Well, my home, my shop, what does it make a difference? So why beveischa? So this is very beautiful. The Gemara says, matam. So really the way the Gemara dashes the pasuk is like this. Lo yelecha beveischa. You will not have money in your house. When will you not have money in your house? The Gemara says, the way the dash in the pasuk is, eifa ve'eifa gidol l'ketana. If you have, what's the word? Not erroneous, but erroneous weights and measures. Imprecise, thank you. Imprecise weights and measures. So it's a cause and effect. It's cause, or I should say really it's an effect and a cause. You will not be financially successful, right? You will not have money in your home if you have imprecise weights and measures. It's the effect and the cause. The Gemara says, Lo yelecha b'kischa. So same idea was the pasuk says, you should not have in your pocket even ve'even gidol l'ketana, a large and a small stone. Once again, imprecise weights. So why does it have to say in your pocket? It doesn't matter in your pocket, in your house, who cares? Same idea. So the Gemara says, Lo yeh b'chizka matam. Why is it that you'll have no money in your pocket? Right? Why would it be that I'll have no money in my pocket? Matam mishum even ve'even. If you have imprecise weights. The idea about says that obviously people engage in these practices because they think they're going to make more money. Kamashal the Torah tells us, when will you not have money in your home if you have imprecise weights? When will you not have money in your pocket if you have imprecise weights? Aval Evan shtema v'tzedek yelecha. So I'll say eifa shtema v'tzedek yelecha. However, on the flip side, if you have precise weights, i.e., if I'm honest in business, then Emir Hashem, I will have the parnasa. Beautiful. Turn up on them. Lo yelecha malamed shema amidin agardamin lemidos ve'in ma'amidin agardamin l'sharm. So both said this is very interesting. So the Torah says you shouldn't have imprecise weights and measures. What does this teach us? We appoint officers. Agardamin, the Rashbam says, memuna lahalkos v'lenosh ma'avsi amidos. We appoint officers to oversee weights and measures, to make sure that merchants are using weights and measures. And the Rashbam says, and if they find that you're using imprecise weights and measures, then what could they do? They can give you malchus. So I'll say, now, this is incredible. Why? Chazal understood, the Gemara understood, because it's basic understanding that the only way that a legal system works is if there are repercussions for the commission of a crime. Right? If there's a revolving door system and people could commit a crime and pretty much nothing ever happens to them, then of course crime continues to occur over and over and over again. It's fascinating. So you want merchants to use precise weights and measures. So when the officer comes in, I will say, it's incredible, by the way, you're not getting a citation. What are you getting? A punch in the face. It's incredible. Like, obviously they're not giving them malchus right there, but you're getting malchus. It's fascinating, right? You're not getting a write-up. You're not getting a warning. You're getting malchus. It's fascinating. You're getting malchus. So the Gemara says, how do we know that we go ahead and we appoint officers to oversee weights and measures, but listen to this, not to oversee prices. This is fascinating. We do not, essentially the halacha doesn't get involved in prices. Merchants are going to charge you, or isn't going to charge you. Why? So Rashbam points out, why not? That's easy. Because if someone's charging too much money, then what? People are going somewhere else. Like, in other words, the market itself prevents people from overcharging. Now again, if you have a situation where a person has a monopoly, that's a different kind of situation. But in general, it's fascinating. We don't get involved, halacha doesn't get involved in prices. Now, obviously there's a concept of ona and different things like that, but that's kind of post-transactional. But in terms of the setting of prices, don't get involved in that. The Gemara says, "The beinasia o kima gardam and the bein lamidos bein the sharm." So this is interesting. One time it happened that in the beinasia, in the house of the nasi, they established overseers, managers. What did I use? Supervisors, both for weights as well as for pricing. Amar Shmuel and the Karna. So Shmuel said to Karna, "Pok tani lahu." So Shmuel said to his Tam Karna, he said, "Karna, go out and teach them that they're wrong. Go and teach them tani lahu. Mamidin agardam lamidos ve'im mamidin agardam l'sharm." Go out and teach them that we only appoint supervisors for weights and measures and not for prices. So what happened? Karna goes out. Nafak darash lahu ma'amidin agardam and bein lamidos bein l'sharim. So interesting. Karna went out and taught them we appoint supervisors both for weights and measures and for prices. So we'll say not like Shmuel. So it gets back to Shmuel. Shmuel gets very upset because Shmuel said to Karna, "I told you to go out and teach something different." Amrli mashmecha. So he says to Karna, "What's your name?" So Karna says, "Karna, teipok le Karna be'inei." So there should be a horn that comes out of your eye. In other words, he cursed Karna. Nafka la Karna be'inei. And sure enough, a horn or some type of growth grew out of Karna's eye. Now, say, now what is that? Like, what is this whole thing? So I'll say, so understand, Shmuel took it that Karna was disparaging of him. Shmuel told Karna to go out and give over a particular ruling to the house of the Nasi. What was the ruling? We set up supervisors for weights and measures. We do not set up supervisors for pricing. Karna went out and did his own thing. Shmuel looked at that as a tremendous sign of disrespect. So we'll say, so we've seen this many times throughout Shas, that in general, whenever there is disrespect of Talmidei Chachamim, so the repercussions are often swift and intense. The idea behind that is because, remember, Talmidei Chachamim represent the transmission, the Masorah. And the moment that we find just disrespect to Talmidei Chachamim, that causes an erosion in the Masorah. That's why often, again, the response to the disparagement of Talmidei Chachamim is swift and responsive. Especially, I will say, in this case, the eye, Karna, what Shmuel felt was, Karna obviously did not look at Shmuel with the right respect and esteem, right? Because otherwise he would have given over the ruling as Shmuel told him to. So that's why Shmuel punishes him in the eye, right? In the eye. So the Gemara says, by the way, just as an aside, but why did Karna go out and teach something differently? Obviously, Karna must have held like someone else. Kihad Amrami Barchama Amr Yitzchak Ma'amidin Agardamin. Sorry. Bein Lamidos, Bein L'Sharim Mipnei Haramai. So we'll say at the end of the day, there is another school of thought. Shmuel wasn't the only opinion. There's a school of Rabbi Barchama, Rabbi Yitzchak, that we do appoint supervisors both for weights and measures as well as for prices. So again, there is another opinion. What seems to have gone wrong in this story is the way that Karna handled it. Had Karna said, Shmuel, what about the other opinion? That would have been one thing, but Shmuel dispatched him to do X. Right? He did Y. That was a slight to Shmuel as a Torah scholar, almost like Karna viewed Shmuel in the wrong way, and as such the punishment. Tarabanan. Let's go right to so we'll say some interesting weighing Gemaras. Haya mevakesh shimena litra, shokel litra. Let's listen to this. If I go to a merchant and I want to buy a litra, right? A litra is a amount, a dry volume, right? I want to go ahead and I want to buy a litra of meat. So what happens? The merchant measures out for me a litra of meat. Chatzi litra, shokal chatzi litra. I go to buy a half a litra, I get a half a litra. Revia litra, shokal or revia litra. I go to get a quarter of a litra of meat, I get a quarter of a litra. The Gemara says, okay, my kamashlan, what exactly are you teaching me over here? So it's fascinating. The Gemara says, the maskinon miskali adhachi. So Rabbi said, this is fascinating. What this is teaching us is the smallest weight they had was a quarter of a litra. That we did not make weights smaller than that out of fear, ultimately, again, of imprecision. So quarter litra was the smallest weight they would make. That's what it's coming to teach me. So Rabbi said, this is very interesting. Tan Rabbanan, hayimavaki shemenu shlosha revai litra. So watch this. Let's say I come to Reuven the butcher, and I want to buy 3/4 of a litra of meat. So we'll say, so how do I get 3/4 of a litra of meat? So again, remember, there's no 3/4 weight, right? There's a litra weight, a half a litra weight, a quarter litra weight. So how do I get 3/4 of a litra of meat? So what would you say? So measure 3 1/4 pieces of meat. The Pasuk Gemara says, no. Lo yomar lo shakel lishlosha revai litra achas achas. You don't do that. We don't do 3/4 one by one. Ella, this is very interesting. Shokel litra umaniach rabia litra Basra. Rather, we'll say, what do? We take a 1 litra weight, and on the other side put the meat and a 1/4 litra weight. And when they become even, ultimately, again, that's 3/4 of a litra. What's the logic in Basra? So remember, again, the issue with individual measurings is because, first of all, measuring is always some level of imprecision. We'd rather have 1 batch of imprecision than 3 batches of imprecision. That's essentially the idea. Also, remember, if you go with the idea that you always tilt the scale in the favor of the purchaser, so that's a lot of extra that the purchaser is getting from 3 weighings. So really fascinating. So therefore, again, when possible, we'd rather go with 1 weighing than multiple weighings. So 3/4 of a litra, although I could have done 3 1/4 piece weighings, that would have been 3 imprecisions, versus or 3 even tiltings in the purchaser's favor, versus saying no, take a 1 litra weight, put 1/4 litra on the other side, put on the meat, and when the scales are even, that's 3/4 of a litra of meat. Same idea. So we'll say, let's say again, in another case, I'm buying 10 litras of meat. 10 litras of meat. So we'll say, so now, again, there's no 10 litra weight, right? What weight do you have? You have 1 litra, half a litra, 1/4 of a litra. So how do you buy 10 litras of meat? So lo yomar lo shakali achas achos v'chriya. So we'll say, so again, so now if I'm the purchaser, what I really want is, I say, no problem, just measure 10 litras out. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And again, if I'm the purchaser, that works beautifully for me because I get 10 tilts of the scale. Rather, you don't do that. Rather, so we'll say instead what we do is we take 10 1 litra weights, put them on one side of the scale, put the meat on the other side of the scale. Now again, remember, we're going to tilt the scale in the favor of the purchaser because that's what the Mishnah said. But in a dome, 1 tilt to 10 tilts. Okay, fascinating. Tan Rabbanon. So we'll say now just a little bit about the scales themselves. How are scales constructed? So we'll say, so now the Gemara says, nefesh maznaim. So we'll say the nefesh is the fulcrum. Right? So the fulcrum, remember again, there's 2 different types of scales. There's a scale that sits on the ground, on the counter. It doesn't have to be the ground, the counter, right? So you have your base, you have the stem that comes up, right? The vertical one. Then you have again the horizontal piece. Then you're going to have the ropes that hold the pans, and that fulcrum is that little piece in the middle that holds everything together. So the Gemara says over here, so nefesh maznaim tluya ba'avri gimel tefachim. So we'll say, so here's the way you go ahead and you construct a scale. The fulcrum of the scale has to be 3 tefachim off the ground. Okay? Ve'gavoa mina aretz shlosha tefachim. The pans of the scale should also be 3 tefachim off the ground. Ve'kana umasna. I both say, so the kana masna, kana literally means the beam. That's the horizontal piece. Umasna and the ropes. Shala shneim asar tefachim. Our 12 tefachim. That's in length. Our 12 tefachim. V'shal tzmarim. So I'll say, so again, these are just now understand what this is. This is all in line with the same way that you have weights and measures that have to be just, that have to be correct, that have to be full. You want to also have a model for how scales are constructed, right? I don't want every Chaim Yankel constructing his own scale. I want scales to be constructed in a certain way as well. So here it is. Vishal tzamarim, vishal zagogin. So I'll say, so people who sell wool and people who sell glassware. Tuluya ba'avir shnei tfachim. So the scale is suspended 2 tefachim in the air. Ugava min ha'ar shnei tefachim. It is above the ground 2 tefachim. V'kana umasna shala. And again, it's beam, which is the horizontal piece. Umasna, and it's ropes. The ropes, remember again, support the pans that are hanging down. Tes tefachim are 9 tefachim. V'shal chendeni v'shal balabayis. And the chendeni balabayis, the shopkeeper, the balabayis. Tuluya ba'avir tefach. ultimately again suspended, right? Or go tuli ba'aver, suspended in the air, 1 tefach. Ugavam min haaretz tefach is up from the ground, 1 tefach. V'kano masna davim in the ropes, shalosh shisha tefachim. V'shel tortani. So we'll say these are all different types of scales. V'shel tortani. What's a tortani? A tortani, we'll say, is a metal guy. Rashi says, Rashi says, maznaim shel kesav v'zav uktanos hein tortani atzorif kar. So we'll say he's like a smelter, right? He's a guy who deals with like different pieces of iron, different pieces of metal. Not iron, metal. Tortani tli ba'aver shalosh etzbos. His scale is suspended in the air, 3 etzbos, 3 finger breadths. V'gavam min ha'aretz shlosha etzbos. V'kano masna shala ini odea. This is interesting. So the Gemara says over here, I don't know. Ultimately, again, the size or the dimensions of his kana, the beam, and the ropes. V'vahach kamaisa demai. So mostly here's what's interesting. If you notice how this brisa began, the brisa began by talking about a scale. Who said the fulcrum, right? The fulcrum is tuluya ba'aver, is suspended in the air 3 tefachim. Its pans are 3 tefachim off the ground, and its beam and its ropes are 12 tefachim in distance or in length. So we'll say, now, interestingly enough, afterwards the Gemara goes on to identify scales used by different professions. Yet in this first one, it doesn't identify what type of profession is using this type of scale. So the Gemara says, "Alahach kamaisa demai." Which type of person is using that first scale? Both I pay test my base 89b. So diagrumi. So let's say it's diagrumi. Who is that? These are people who deal with large pieces of metal. Okay, large metals. Fine. So now, this is very important. So after we finish talking about the fact that you have to have, we'll call it proper weights and measures, you also have to have proper scales. Fine. So Mani Bar says, so I'll say this is fascinating. The same way that we said that a scale has to look a certain way, right? It has to have certain dimensions in order for you to be able to use it transactionally, and if not, you're in violation of an isser, of a prohibition. The same idea applies to tumah. The Rabbi say, now what is that? When you look at the Rashbam, this is fascinating. Kach amru le'inyan tumasan, de'ein mekablim tumah im ein asuyin kach, de'lo chashivi kli kevim da'asr l'shkal b'hem. So Rabbi say, now watch this. These dimensions, right? So in order for me to use a scale, what has to happen? It has to have these aforementioned dimensions. So I will say, when is a kli makabel tumah? When is a kli makabel tumah? Only if what? Only if it's a finished product. So when is a scale considered to be a finished product? When you could use it in the marketplace. When it has, so in other words, the same dimensions that make it roi or fit for use are the very same dimensions that allow it to be makabel tumah. In other words, or say the converse, if you can't use it in the marketplace, it means it's what? It's what? It's not a kli. So the same way that it can't be used for commerce, it's also what? Not makabel tumah. Also not makabel tumah. So the Gemara says, so just point out, by the way, there's also like a tremendous Mosar Haskell if you think about that. Only something that is a real kli can be makabel tumah. If it's not functional or usable, it's not makabel tumah. So if you think about this in our own lives, a lot of times when we are makabel tumah, right, and we're makabel tumah, don't raise your hand if you've been makabel tumah, right, this morning. Right, we're makabel tumah all the time. And interestingly enough, we think that when we're makabel tumah, when we do things wrong, when we commit averos, and when we defile ourselves, so we think that's representative, or that is emblematic of our brokenness. But I will say, in fact, what's incredible is it's just the opposite. The fact that I am makabel tumah indicates that I'm a kli, that I have incredible purpose, that I have incredible kedusha, that I have a use. If I wasn't the kli, I wouldn't be makabel tumah. Things that are not getting. That's why, for example, if you think about it, like a baby. I'm thinking about this because Baruch Hashem, I had my new grandson who was with us for Shabbos. And on one hand, why are people drawn to babies? Why are they drawn to babies? Because the truth is, like, I was looking at him, I was actually preparing the daf with my grandson a little bit. He wasn't of much help, but he was of help, because the truth is like, the beauty of baby, I was looking at him like, it's a tzaddik gomer. A tzaddik gomer. He's absolutely no averos. When was the last time you spent some time with someone who has absolutely no averos? So I disclosed Baruch Hashem last night to spend time with someone who has absolutely no averos, and it's beautiful. But if you notice, by the way, but at the same time, what could a baby do? What could a baby do? Nothing. Nothing. It gives simcha, it's very nice, enjoy it, delicious, cute, puts a smile on your face, but doesn't do anything. Because if you're not a kli, right, so the only way to impact the world is to be a kli. But when you're a kli, you're mekabel tumah. And if you're mekabel tumah, that means you have averos. So it's this incredible dialect, this incredible dynamic, that we think that when we sin, that represents how broken we are, but in fact it's just the opposite. The fact that I sin means, the fact that I can be mekabel tumah means that I'm a kli. And because I'm a kli, I could accomplish things. I could do things. If you're not mekabel tumah, it means you're not a kli. So as I said, just this incredible idea that not to say, I want to go on record, not to say that sin is good. Sin is not good. Everything, write that down, right? Sin is not good, right? But I will say, but the reality is that when I sin is very life affirming, because what sin says is when I commit an avera, that means I'm mekabel tumah, and the fact that I can be mekabel tumah means that I'm a kli. And the fact that I'm a kli means that I function, that I have purpose, that I have use. Because if I wasn't a kli, I couldn't commit averas, I wouldn't be mekabel tumah, I have no impact. So just sometimes we sin and we get so down and we're so broken and so humiliated and like it takes the wind out of our sails. But sometimes I will say, I know it sounds strange, there's incredible chizuk in sin. Again, one last time, if I sin, I'm mekabel tumah. Only a kli can be mekabel tumah, which means if I make a mistake and I feel it and I know it, that means I'm a kli that's been mekabel tumah. And if I'm a kli, I'm mekabel tumah, that means I can also be a kli that could accomplish incredible things. Incredible. So what's the lesson over here? Tonino chutma znaim shalchen vini v'shav alabatim tefach. So again, the Gemara says the chutma znaim, literally the string of the scales of the chen vini of Bava says the tefach. Kana umasna, it's beam and it's ropes, shallah, it's strichale, it's the lotna. So because that was that amount, we had to quote it ultimately and then give us the rest of the dimensions for the scales of balabatim and chenveni. Fine, tarabanan, enos and mishkalos. This is very interesting. You cannot make weights. You cannot make weights out of the following materials. Lo shal bats is tin. V'lo shal aver, lead. V'lo shal gistura. Gistura. So we'll say gistura means like a. There's a word for this, right? When you make something out of multiple materials, an alloy, right? A combination. So you can't go ahead and take a bunch of metals, kind of like smelt them down, and make a weight out of that. But I'll say, because again, it makes sense because everything has different liturgical, right? And that is a word, right? Liturgical properties. So let's say, see, you can't go ahead and combine different liturgical properties. So the Gemara says, "V'lo shal shamini matachos." Nor say, nor can you go ahead and just make weights out of any metals that you want. Aval osu. So what are weights made of? Ela osu shal sunma, out of rock, v'shel zuchuchis, out of glass. Interesting. Turn up on. Now switching gears for just a moment. This is fascinating. So remember again, we spoke about this idea that in certain places the custom was that when you sold someone produce, after you weighed it, after you measured it out, you would smooth out the pile. Right? The best way to imagine this is like you buy flour, you buy sugar, you buy salt. So by definition, it always piles. So what do you want to do? You want to smooth it out. So watch this. Now the question is, what can you smooth it out with? So the Gemara says, "Ein osin hamachak shel hadalas." Interestingly enough, you can't make the smoother. We'll just call it the smoother. I'm sure there's a technical term for it. The smoother out of dalas. Dalos means like a gourd. So if you could imagine you have a gourd. I guess what you would do is you would take like a thick slice of gourd, go ahead and let it dry out, or even not dry out, but partially dry out, and then you use that as a smoother. Why can't you use that? If they shukal, we'll say you can't use that because it's very light. So because it's very light, it's not going to make a straight line, but rather again it's going to leave some of the pile. V'lo shel matachas, but you also can't make a smoother out of metal. Why? Because once that metal is heavy, and what's going to happen? It's going to dip below a little bit, and so again, essentially, one will put the seller at a disadvantage, and one will put the purchaser at a disadvantage. So what do you make a smoother out of? Also, shel zayis
v'shel egos, v'shel shikma, v'shel eshbara. So Rabbi say this is fascinating. So what can you make your smoother out of? Olive wood, egos wood, or shikma wood. Right? Shikma is sycamore, or so eshbara. So eshbara is translated often as boxwood. So the idea is, I will say once again, this is all these minhag hamakom ideas. So you have to make your smoother out of something that is not too light, but also not too heavy. Tan Rabbanon, ein onesin es hamachak, tzidot echad av, v'tzidot echad kasar. So it's very interesting. You also can't make the smoother one side thick and one side thin. Which makes sense, because then you're going to get an uneven smooth. V'lo yimchok b'vas achos. So also you can't smooth in one swoop, in one action. Why? Shamochik b'vas achos ra l'mochad. So Rabbi say this is fascinating. If you try to smooth everything at once, what's going to happen? Rabbi say this is fascinating. If you try to smooth everything at once, what ends up occurring? So the thing about this, as you get to the end, what ends up happening? You're not maintaining the same level. So inevitably what ends up happening is you move up. Against the friction of the produce, you end up moving up. So you get an uneven smooth, you get an uneven smooth, and of course that's beneficial to the purchaser, detrimental to the buyer. Right? You also can smooth a little bit at a time. Why not? So you also, if you end up smoothing a little bit at a time, just inadvertently you end up moving downward. And what ends up happening is that puts the purchaser at a disadvantage and an advantage to the seller. So rather, how do you smooth? So the Gemara says, so first of all, the Rashbam points out, actually it's interesting, the Gemara doesn't say it, but the Rashbam says, what should you do? Ella, the Rashbam says, Ma'at kigon mochek rochav tevach levad u'magbias hamachok u'mochav b'koshes hamachok u'mochek tevach ela b'pam achos u'benachos inay b'shtei pamim kigon mochek ad chatzi hamida. So the Rashbam says rather what you should do is you should smooth it out in two shifts. One, go halfway, stop, and then do the rest. They will say, what a profound Musar HaSkil. When you want to smooth out, right? When you want to create a path ahead. So here's the problem. If you try just to move yourself forward in one fell swoop, what ends up happening? It doesn't work. On the same time, if you go ahead and you just move ma'at, you move too slowly, it also doesn't work. Right? The pathway to growth, the pathway to smoothing your life forward can't be done in one step, because I will say too much growth too quickly usually is not sustainable. But you also can't move too slow, because then too slow, again, you're underselling yourself. So Rabbi says, how do you smooth the pathway for growth ahead of yourself? Take it slow, not too slow, but not too fast. And I will say, what a tremendous Musar HaSkil just for us. When charting a path for growth, too fast is not good, too slow is not good. A person has to find a way to move themselves forward at proper increments. The Gemara goes right to Akula Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So I'll say, this is incredible. For all of these things, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said as follows. So we'll say, so now, remember, here's what's interesting. So the Gemara, well, let me read it and then we'll see. Woe to me if I say it. Rabbi say, now watch this. Watch what the Gemara just did. The Gemara, right, in the course of telling us how to go ahead and make sure that you're running your business in a just way, also provided for us what? Plenty of fodder for how you could cheat someone. So what did I found something very interesting, right? If I go ahead and I use a metal smoother, and I'm selling produce, that's actually a great chap for me, right? So no one's going to know. Again, assuming I did the daf and the purchaser did not. So now I can go ahead and cheat Ruvain, or we'll say, by the way, or the opposite way, right? If you could cheat an unsuspecting merchant also. So it's interesting in all of these things, right? In all of these things, ultimately, again, the halacha is telling us how to be careful, but also providing fodder for those who want to cheat the system. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, I'm conflicted. Idly, I don't know, should I share this information? Not share this information. So the Gemara says, idly, right? So the Gemara says, idly im omer, idly im lo omer. So listen to this. So the Gemara says, im omer, because if I share it, shema yimudu ha'ramayim. Then I will say, unscrupulous people, Ramayim, will hear this, and they're going to figure out ways to cheat unsuspecting customers or to cheat unsuspecting merchants. V'im lo omer, but if I don't share it, yomru harabayin ein tamidei chachamim bikin b'maisi yadeinu. If I don't say it, then the Ramah and the cheaters are going to think, we could pull a fast one over the rabbis. They don't know what we're doing. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says it's important to say it so that they know we know their tricks. So let's say, you hear this? Should we share it or shouldn't we share it? If we share it, people may learn what to do in an inappropriate way. And if we don't share it, the Ramah will think that they could pull a fast one over us. So the Gemara says, okay, no, so Yibailahu, Amra lo Amra. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, what did you do? So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai laments this difficult predicament he is in. Now I want us to know, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, what did you do? Did you share it or didn't you share it? Amra. He said it. He said, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai shared it. Amra. And I will say, ultimately, again, he shared it because he's based on the following pasuk. What's the following pasuk? Ki yesharim darchei Hashem. The ways of HaKadosh Baruch Hu are just, are straight. The tzaddikim yelchu bam. The tzaddikim ultimately again will walk in these ways. Uposhim yikashlu bam. But the sinners ultimately again will stumble in them. Now, interestingly enough, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai interpreted this to say, Uposhim yikashlu bam means that the Rishonim will find ways to exploit them. That yes, sometimes when teaching a halacha, so some people learn from a halacha what to do, and some people learn from a halacha how to exploit it. And I will say, but there's a very profound lesson. As Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, we have to appeal to the highest common level. In other words, we firstly have to assume that Rama'in, I will say, dishonest, unscrupulous people are going to do what they're going to do no matter what. The fact that, yes, they can intuit from things that we say how to cheat, okay, that's unfortunate and tragic, but that is the reality of the human condition. But there are so many more people who, of course, want to do the right thing, and therefore, again, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says we have to teach the information, knowing full well that there may be someone who will exploit it. Incredible. Tanabanon. Well, Sasu Abba b'mishpat, b'mita b'mishkol m'shura. So the pasuk says, you shall not go ahead and literally perform an iniquity in judgment. B'mida b'mishkol b'mishura. What does this mean? B'mida. So say b'mida. Now, all these are different measurements. What does mida mean? Zu medidus karka. This refers to the measuring of land. So we'll say when you measure land, you have to measure land accurately. What does this refer to? Shelo yimdod la'achas b'mos ha'chamal u'la'achas b'mos ha'gishamin. So we'll say, remember again, they used to measure, the way they would measure land was with a rope. So interestingly enough, if let's say you're dividing up an estate, 5 brothers are dividing up an estate, you have to make sure not to measure some land during the winter and some land during the summer. Why? During the winter, right, when it's moist outside, so the rope often expands. And when it's the summer and it's hot outside, the rope constricts. So there's a difference. There is a difference in measurements between summer and winter. So if you divide up part of the estate in the summer, part of the estate in the winter, that's incorrect. Rather, again, if you're dividing an estate, and well, obviously, they must have taken this into account in their measurements. But when going ahead and dividing an estate, divide it all at once. Good. The mishkal. So what does it mean with the mishkal? Means a weight. Shelo yatmin mishkalosav b'melach. You should not keep your weights in salt. You should not store them in salt. So we'll say, so it's interesting over the Rashbam. The Rashbam says over here, he says, b'melach shemachbina. So apparently salt makes the weights heavier. Okay? B'meshura. So we'll say, meshura usually refers to a liquid measure. What does this mean, meshura? Shelo yarsiach. So we'll say, this is fascinating. When you're pouring off liquid, so remember again, if you pour, the Rashbam points out over here, if you pour, let's say you pour from a height, sometimes you pour, or you pour very quickly, what ends up happening? So the liquid froths up. So again, if you have a little bit of a naive purchaser, what's going to happen? He's going to see the froth, and he's going to assume that the froth means that the entire utensil, the kli, is full. So the seller could end up defrauding the purchaser by making the purchaser think that he received a full utensil filled with stuff, when in fact he hasn't. So therefore, shelo yarsiach means don't pour off liquid in a way that creates a froth and thereby defrauds the purchaser. But kal v'chomer, and it's kal v'chomer, ma meshura shu echa mishloshim b'shisha belod. Now here's what's interesting. Meshura itself is also an actual unit of measurement. Now, Meshura is actually the smallest of all measurements. Listen to this. Meshura is 1/36. It's 1/36 of a log. So it's obviously a very small amount. Yet, hikpida alav Torah. The Torah is makbid on it, that even with the meshura, which is a very small measure, you have to be careful not to defraud. Kal v'chomer lehin, v'chatzihin, u'shlishis u'revias v'lug, v'chatzi lug, u'revias, v'chatzi tuman v'ochla. So I want to say, so again, a fascinating idea, that halacha l'maisa, if you see that the Torah itself is so careful, even with the smallest units of measurement, alachas kama b'kama, the rest of the units of measurement as well. So I want to say, let me just start next Gemara, then we're going to stop for today, because actually coming attraction is really beautiful Gemara. Rav Yehuda Marav, Asr li adam shiyash shemida chasera or yisera b'soch beiso, va'afilu hi avit shalini raglayim. I want to say, you are not allowed to maintain in your home deficient weights. You are not allowed to own it. You're not allowed to keep it, even if you make it into a bedpan. So you figure to yourself, you know what, I have these deficient weights. I'm not going to use it, chas v'shalom, but why should I throw it out? I can repurpose it. So what do you repurpose your weight into? A bedpan. A bedpan, how the Gemara says, you still are not allowed to do that. So like I say, so why not? In other words, again, I'm not going to use it as weights and measures. So why can't I repurpose it into a bedpan? Again, we'll see. Okay, we'll stop over here today. We'll pick up an answer with this Gemara tomorrow. A profound Gemara ahead of us. We want to start to the week.